was glad, in a way, but I felt betrayed nonetheless. My friend, don't forget why it is that we're here. Watson spoke softly, ever cautious and wary of the word. I pondered my response when I was interrupted by a series of firm knocks at the door. Watson stood up to answer it, one hand slightly behind his right hip, staying near his knife. Looking through the peephole, he shot us a warning look as she opened the door. Eben stepped into my apartment. Christina immediately stood and nodded politely, rage barely constrained as she excused herself upstairs. Watson returned to his spot on the couch, puffing on his pipe. Eben walked over with a gentle hand on my shoulder and prompted me to turn around. Mind if I take a look? I turned so she could see the whip's handiwork. She nodded knowingly, then produced a jar of strange ointment and slathered some on her hands. This is taking a bit, but it'll help with the healing. Reduce scarring by a great deal, too. I winced as she began to gently apply the salve to my back. After the sting, though, came relief. Whatever it was strongly medicated. You understand why I had to make the display I did. It was Watson who answered, though, not me, because your throne sits at the apex of an organization built by maniacs, criminals, and psychopaths of the old world. If she was offended or angry, she didn't show it. Merely nodded as she continued her work on my back. I want you to consider what we've built here. The stability and progress we've made since the end of the war. Before you judge me, I want you to consider what you saw out at Greenwood. Now, you know what we're up against. She was right, as usual. The Army of the Dawn wasn't a pretty organization, but what lay at its borders was far worse. Thinking what might happen to my friends back in the West if the Army overran them worried me. Thinking what might happen if the Aztecos found them horrified me. As if reading my mind, the Iron Lady spoke again. I want you to go back home. Once you're better, of course. Let the folks know what's really out there. I looked at Watson for just a moment, betraying my surprise. Oh, come on. You don't think I run an organization as large as this without my fair share of spies, do you? I know where you came from, Farmbridge, and Big Bear before that. And I know despite all my organization's shortcomings, you still saved my life. Twice. The first time, I honestly didn't know it was her I was saving. In fact, I thought I was saving a victim from a raider attack. Turns out it had been the other way around. I'd killed an innocent person trying to chop the head off this oversized monster. But the second time, that one had been by choice. I put my body between her and poison darts on purpose. Once you're strong enough for travel, I want you to go back home. Let folks know what's lurking on the wasteland. You know what we're up against. You know we can use all the resources we can get to counter this threat. I'd rather not have to waste the manpower on both sides to take them by force. She finished reapplying the salve, then screwed the top back on it and set it on the coffee table. Reapply every night until your back is fully healed. And once it does, requisition whatever supplies you need from the army. The Aztecos are coming, gentlemen. Greenswood was just a taste. Nobody can survive alone in the wastes anymore. Without waiting for a response, the Iron Lady left, leaving a massive silence between Watson and I. Days 555 to 560. Despite not being well enough to travel yet, we still made preparations to leave. Christina was being distant. She didn't know about Alexis, of course. Not that it mattered. Alexis was a different life ago, or so I told myself. Days 561 to 564. Christina begged me to stay so I could fully recover, but I was too eager to get back on the road. I wouldn't be able to carry my own supplies for a while yet, but Watson was eager to leave just as I was and agreed to carry my load. Reluctantly, Christina finally agreed. She didn't have much to pack other than travel supplies. Being a slave for most of the end of the world left her with little to call her own. My heart hurt a bit for her as we hit the road and my mind started wandering. She'd changed so much since the world went upside down. She'd been so alive once, and now she was cautious all the time. Her eyes constantly scanning for danger. She reminded me of Lily, and my heart ached a bit thinking about her and the rest. Soon I found myself thinking about Alexis, but I shoved the thoughts away. Days 565 to 570. I felt like I'd been on the road ever since the world ended. The joke got a little bit of a laugh from both Watson and Christina as we sat around the campfire. It was nice to see them laugh for a change. The last few months spent with the Iron Lady's army had been difficult. We'd all done things we never thought we'd do. The weight of our respective sins seemed to weigh heavily on us all. I hated to admit it, but maybe the three of us belonged with the Army of the Dawn more than we did back west. Well, maybe except for Christina. She'd only killed to protect me. It hurt to think about that night, how her mood had changed toward me ever since. There was a definite rift between us, but we clung to each other desperately regardless. As I lay down next to her to go to sleep, I couldn't help but wonder what we'd do if we ever found peace. Per usual, I guiltily found my thoughts drifting from Christina to Alexis as sleep overtook me. Days 571 to 574. Harsh weather forced us to shelter in place for a few days. Freak torrential downpours of dirty brown rain. Extreme weather events were becoming more common as the Earth dealt with multiple environmental crises at the same time, and the unexpected torrent of rain created a serious danger of flash flooding. We moved to high ground and set up our tents, spending a miserable 3 days waiting for the rain to end. I didn't want to admit it, but I was glad for the break. My back was still healing, and the stress of travel was taking a real toll. Christina tended to it every day at sunrise and sunset, and I was grateful for her attention. As we lay together one night, though, I realized we hadn't said I love you to each other since before the end of our old world, long before the fight that led to our breakup. Days 575 to 579. We ran into the Army's border guards after a few more days of travel. This wasn't unexpected. We knew that the Iron Lady had strengthened her border outposts ever since the attack on Greenwood. What was unexpected, though, was what we found. A caravan of people being turned around by the guards. This was a caravan of refugees from the western part of the Iron Lady's kingdom, and the border guards posted along the highway were preventing them from leaving her territory altogether. It was a bunch of scared families, no doubt terrified of an Azteco invasion, and seeking safety in the far west. But the guards wouldn't let them through, angrily berating them and threatening to use their clubs on them if they didn't hurry up and turn around. It seems like the Iron Lady didn't want anyone leaving her little kingdom and thus weakening it right before a potential war. It was a stark reminder of her iron-fisted rule, but without her, these people would have probably been dead to begin with. I'd crossed that border once a long time ago, fully convinced that this army of raiders had to be taken down somehow. Now that I'd seen what was truly out here in the wastes, I wasn't so sure anymore. Days 580 to 585. We were allowed passage thanks to the orders I had from the Iron Lady herself. The guard captain looked skeptical at first, but thought better of it. He had enough to deal with without crossing the Iron Lady herself. As we left the lady's territory, we passed another caravan, this time on the way in. It had several wagons full of supplies, apparently a scavenging mission. But bringing up the rear was a line of survivors, all connected to each other by a rope tied around their neck. If they were lucky, they'd become slaves. If not... Christina averted her gaze. I caught Watson holding mine, his face searching mine for something. I hated what I saw, and I caught myself torn between the stability the Iron Lady provided and the cruelty of her rule. I believed that she wanted to build a better world. This was a temporary price, she once told me, without giving the raiders and...
When you buy from your guy, you don't even know what's in it. But when you buy from Brad's store, you have hundreds of products to choose from.
Cannibals, some believed that it was impossible to bring order to the wastes. They were free to raid outside the territory but not within it. And slowly over time, when civilization returned, the old ways would die out with it. Was this really the only way to build a new world from the ashes of the old? Days 586 to 590. We were moving faster now. I felt better, and I was able to carry my own backpack for a few hours at a time without being in agony. Seeing the familiar landmarks definitely helped our morale. I was excited to get back to Farmbridge and see Ruslana again. But what would I tell her when I finally saw her? The Iron Lady had asked me to be honest about my report on her and her little kingdom, along with the threat of the Aztecos to everyone in the wastes. I believed in the threat the Aztecos presented, and I knew that Farmbridge or Big Bear couldn't survive alone. Once they rolled through the Iron Lady's territory, they'd come for them next. It made sense to join forces with the Iron Lady, but that meant putting the people I loved in her grasp. I found myself more and more conflicted, survival versus ideals. The wrong decision could get everyone I cared about dead. Days 591 to 595. The sound of a jet engine put a halt to a lively conversation between the three of us, and we all simultaneously craned our heads up to the sky. The thick cloud cover made it difficult to see much. Thick debris still clogged the Earth's atmosphere, but somewhere above those clouds was a jet. Had to be a military one if it was braving the debris in the upper atmosphere. We never spotted it, but could track its movement west over our heads by the sound. At some point, it seemed to turn north, and then a few minutes later, the sky went silent again. The jet ended all conversation for the rest of our traveling day. All of us quietly contemplated that somewhere out there, the United States of America still existed. The thought was a sobering one, and it made the Iron Lady and the Aztecos seem small by comparison. But the truth was, we were out here on our own, and as far as we know it, America was now only existing across a handful of military bases somewhere deep in the heartland. There was just no way of telling how the nuclear war was going, or if it was even over yet. Days 596 to 600. Ruslana's people found us about a day and a half out of Farmbridge. She'd set out scouts exactly as I predicted, but the people that met us on horseback were strangers to me. That made things a bit tense. But it seems Ruslana had put out word that we should be expected someday. The scouts led us to Farmbridge, skirting around Slab City to the north of us. It was good that I didn't recognize these scouts. I told Watson when we made camp one night it meant Farmbridge was growing. He grunted his agreement, not bothering to voice the question we were both thinking. But was it enough? Was it enough to resist the Iron Lady and the Aztecos to the east? My mind was still racing even as we approached the gates of Farm Bridge, trying to find a way forward for all of us. Suddenly, a familiar yell brought me back to reality, and staring in shock, I watched Alexis running forward, practically hurtling herself in my arms. Somewhere in the distance, I heard the happy barking sounds of Lucky rapidly approaching. Now, go check out episode 1 with I Survived 100 Days.
Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Saturday, November 12th, 2022, and we are less than 1 week from the 2022 midterm elections, and it looks like the Democratic Party is on track to maintain Senate control, and not only maintain Senate control, but potentially have a pickup across the United States. As it stands today, the Democratic Party currently has 49 seats called for them in the U.S. Senate. This includes a number of competitive races from New Hampshire to Pennsylvania to Colorado to Arizona, with 2 outstanding races in Nevada and Georgia. These 2 states are ones that are going to be decided over the next few days in Nevada and then over the next month in Georgia. Georgia's heading off into a runoff election between Raphael Warnock and Herschel Walker. That will take place in December this year instead of last year's election in January 2021. Instead, they've altered the timeline to a point where it will now be December 6th, about a month ahead of where it normally would have been under the previous election rules. Now, looking at where we are, we have about 95% of the vote in from the state of Nevada. Adam Laxalt currently leads Catherine Cortez Masto, the Democrat, by about 0.1%. 48.5 to 48.4. It's exceptionally close, and it looks like Democrats are, in fact, on track to win this race. Adam Laxalt had started out with a very tremendous lead. In fact, when we look at the individual results, you can see as it trickles in over time, the amount of vote, or I guess it's blurred out here, but what you will find is that there was a much more significant lead for the GOP earlier on. However, as the votes started to pour in, as we started to see more and more results come in, Catherine Cortez Masto began to take batches in at a 60 to 40 rate, 70 to 30 rate, to a point where now, as we expect the final 5% to come in, Catherine Cortez Masto is on track for victory. So how did this exactly happen? How do we come to a point where the narrowest Senate majority possible in U.S. politics still could not be overcome by the Republican Party? And it comes down to this general point and this general conclusion following the 2022 midterms that it was, in fact, not a red wave. And what I mean by that is, it was 1,000% a neutral year, if not a beneficial year for Democrats. Simply put, the polls were wrong. And wrong in a way that we had never really seen them wrong before, in the sense that they are showing Democrats doing significantly worse than they actually ended up doing on election night. And looking at our Senate map, the way that this was extremely strategic for the Democratic Party, it relied on a lot of moving parts. It relied on Democrats being able to win in regions of the country that they otherwise did not previously win in. For instance, in 2016, the last time we had this Senate map up, we can actually pull it up with our past elections. The state of Arizona was a solid GOP state, as was the state of Georgia. In Georgia, Johnny Isakson won by 14 points in this exact seat that Raphael Warnock is now heading into a runoff election. Pat Toomey from Pennsylvania won his race by 1.4%. New Hampshire was won by the Democrats by just 0.1%. Colorado was won by just 5.7%. Ohio was won by the GOP by 21 percentage points. And in Arizona,
Hmm.